Ilsa Schneider sat in the dining hall at Camp Co, Mississippi, staring at the square of golden bread on her plate as though it were an insult. 3 days into captivity, the meals had been plentiful compared to the months of famine in Berlin, yet this unfamiliar yellow cake tested her patience more than hunger ever had. She leaned close to her companion, whispering in clipped German, "What is this?" "Pig food." Across the table, Margaret, a restaurant owner from Munich, smirked. "In Germany we feed corn to animals. Imagine the arrogance, serving it to us as bread." Their laughter rippled through the group of 40 German women POWs, each one glancing at the strange squares with disdain. They had endured the bombing of their cities, the collapse of their nation, and now, apparently, they were expected to eat livestock feed. "Cornbread, ma'am," Sergeant Dorothy Wells replied firmly when she overheard the whispers. The mess hall supervisor set down another tray with quiet pride. "Baked this morning with butter and honey. Southern families have eaten it for generations." Her words were met with scoffs. Ilsa pushed the bread aside, turning instead to the fried chicken and potatoes. She had grown up in her family's bakery, surrounded by the smell of dark rye and sourdough. To her, bread was sacred. This yellow square was an affront. Yet not far away, a younger prisoner hesitated, then took a bite. Surprise flashed across her face, though she quickly looked down as if afraid to admit it tasted better than expected. What would happen when German pride collided with American tradition? The answer began with this single square of cornbread. Backhand index pointing right. If you're intrigued by this cultural clash, subscribe now and comment below. Would you have dared to try it? The camp itself was a world away from the ruins the women had left behind. Barbed wire enclosed neat rows of wooden barracks, but inside the mess hall there was no mistaking the abundance. Platters of roasted chicken, steaming bowls of potatoes, fresh vegetables, even fruit preserves, foods many of the prisoners had not seen in years, were served daily without ration cards or endless queues. To women who had spent months surviving on watery soup and a crust of black bread stretched with sawdust, the meals bordered on unbelievable. Still, pride clung as tightly as hunger. For Ilsa Schneider, once the daughter of a celebrated Berlin baker, food had always carried meaning beyond nourishment. Bread was the heart of civilization. The dense rye loaves of her childhood, the crackle of a sourdough crust fresh from the oven, these were symbols of heritage, not mere calories. To be presented with cornbread, soft and golden and sweetened with honey, felt like a deliberate provocation to her training, an attack on German standards of taste. The irony was inescapable. Captured soldiers and civilians alike were being fed more generously in Mississippi than their own families back in Berlin. Letters from home described children fainting in bread lines, women trading valuables for flour, and neighbors boiling weeds to survive. Here in captivity their plates overflowed. Yet gratitude wrestled with stubborn disdain, and the cornbread became the perfect target. American staff seemed to anticipate this reaction. Captain Patricia Morrison, who oversaw orientation for the women, often reminded them that food was part of culture as much as survival. "In the South," she explained during her first briefing, "cornbread is more than bread. It's tradition, it's family, it's pride." But the words did little to move German hearts. To them, it remained animal feed dressed up as human food. The stage was set. Before long, this simple square of bread would ignite a transformation no one expected. By the fourth meal, the pattern had become clear. Every tray delivered to the long wooden tables came with its golden square, and every time most German women shoved it aside untouched. Some did so with disdain, others with theatrical disgust. The food they would eat, meat, potatoes, vegetables, was consumed eagerly. But the cornbread became a running joke, a symbol of cultural superiority they clung to as fiercely as their language. Margaret, the outspoken Munich restaurant owner, led the charge. She would lift her fork dramatically, tap the bread's yellow crust, and announce in German, "Still feeding us pig food." The women erupted in laughter, echoing her derision like a chorus. Each insult became sharper, a ritual meant to reassure themselves that, though prisoners, their standards of refinement remained intact. Ilsa, with her background in baking, became their authority. Whenever someone mocked the bread, she was expected to nod in agreement, to affirm that nothing American could compare with the rye, wheat, and sourdough traditions of Europe. "In Germany," she declared loudly on one occasion, ensuring Sergeant Wells could hear, "we know what real bread is. This," she pushed the square across her plate, "is not worthy of the name." The sergeant said nothing, only raised an eyebrow. Her silence unsettled Ilsa more than a rebuke might have. There was patience in Wells's eyes, as if she were waiting for something. But the ridicule continued. Greta, another prisoner, whispered, A nation that sends its sons across oceans to fight us, yet eats bread made for cattle? How can they call themselves civilized? The table roared with agreement. And yet, even amid the mockery, cracks began to show. A few younger women, braver or hungrier, nibbled at their squares when they thought no one was watching. Their faces betrayed curiosity, even delight, before they quickly looked away. The laughter drowned it out, but Ilsa noticed. Pride demanded she ignore it. Still, something about their secret bites lodged in her mind like a splinter. The resistance was strong, the ridicule constant. But curiosity, like hunger, had a way of spreading. The laughter around the mess hall carried on like a daily ritual, but slowly the rhythm began to change. One morning, Ilsa noticed Frida, a younger woman barely in her 20s, hesitate over her plate. She glanced left and right, then pinched off a corner of the cornbread. The bite was quick, almost guilty, but her eyes widened as she chewed. Ilsa frowned. "Frida," she called softly in German, "surely you're not eating that?" Frida's cheeks flushed. "It's different," she admitted. "Sweet but not unpleasant." Across the table, Margaret scoffed. "Sweet pig food is still pig food." Yet Frida reached for another bite, her expression betraying something close to pleasure. Others began to notice. Greta leaned closer, whispering, "What does it taste like?" Frida shrugged, embarrassed but honest. "Warm. Soft. Like cake but not quite. It fills you in a way rye bread doesn't." A murmur ran down the table. Some women laughed, but it no longer sounded as certain. A second prisoner, Anna, cautiously tried her square, then another. Soon, 2 or 3 more followed, hiding their enjoyment behind lowered eyes. Ilsa pushed her own portion farther away, lips pressed tight. She wanted to dismiss them, to remind everyone of their heritage and her authority as a baker. But the smell of butter and honey drifted upward, rich and undeniable. Her stomach tightened against her pride. For the first time, the room did not echo with united scorn. Instead, it buzzed with quiet debate, a fracture in their certainty. The golden squares remained on the tables, but now they glowed with possibility, symbols of something the women could no longer mock so easily. The wall of resistance had been chipped. Curiosity had made its first breach. The next afternoon, during orientation, Captain Morrison addressed the women directly. "I hear some of you are struggling with our food," she began evenly, her southern accent firm but not unkind. "Cornbread may be new to you, but here, it's a tradition we hold dear. Families across the South have eaten it for centuries. It's more than food, it's part of who we are." Most of the German women shifted in their seats, unimpressed. Ilsa raised her hand, her voice edged with defiance. "Why not serve us proper bread? Germany has wheat. America has wheat. Why this obsession with corn?" The captain did not bristle. Instead, she smiled faintly. "Because corn is abundant here. It sustains us and it nourishes more than just the body. Sometimes heritage is found in what grows most easily from the earth." That evening, Sergeant Dorothy Wells sought out Ilsa privately. "Mrs. Schneider," she said, folding her arms, "I hear you were a professional baker." Ilsa stiffened with pride. "My family owned Schneider's bakery in Berlin. 3 generations. We knew bread." "Well then," Wells replied, her eyes glinting, "perhaps you'd like to see how we make ours. Tomorrow morning. In my kitchen." It was a clever invitation. To refuse would be to admit fear of discovery, to accept meant risking her pride. Ilsa hesitated, then lifted her chin. "I will come. But do not expect me to eat it." At dawn, she followed Wells into the camp kitchen. Instead of the crude efficiency she anticipated, she found an orderly space filled with gleaming equipment, the kind her father would have admired. Industrial ovens glowed warmly. Counters were stacked with fresh ingredients: flour, butter, eggs, milk. "This is where we feed 250 prisoners and nearly 100 staff," Wells explained, her voice tinged with quiet pride. "All fresh every day." Ilsa inhaled sharply. The air was thick with the comforting scent of yeast and butter. Against her will, memories of Berlin's bakery rose in her mind, dough rising in wooden bowls, her father's steady hands shaping loaves. Wells placed a heavy cast-iron skillet on the counter, pouring in batter with practiced ease. "Cast iron gives it the crust," she said. "The secret isn't in mocking what you don't know. It's in learning what makes it work." Ilsa folded her arms, masking the uneasy hunger stirring inside her. The invitation had become a challenge, and tomorrow, she knew, would bring the reckoning. The skillet hissed as Sergeant Wells slid it from the oven. A golden crust glistened under the kitchen's lamplight, its edges crisp, its center puffed high with steam. The scent filled the room: rich butter, warm corn, and a faint sweetness that curled into Ilsa's nose and refused to leave. "Timing is everything," Wells said, slicing a square. The knife cut clean through, releasing a puff of fragrant heat. She placed the piece on a plate, added a pat of butter that melted instantly, then drizzled a thin line of honey across the surface. "Now," she said firmly, "taste it. Not as a German, not as a prisoner. As a baker." Ilsa stood frozen. Every part of her training warned against this humiliation. Corn was for animals. To admit otherwise meant surrendering a piece of her identity. And yet, her stomach betrayed her with a growl, and her baker's instincts betrayed her with curiosity. She lifted the fork slowly, cutting into the soft interior. The texture surprised her, tender, airy, with just enough crumble to remind her it wasn't wheat. She brought the bite to her lips. The first taste startled her. It wasn't crude or coarse. It was delicate, sweet but balanced, the butter melting into each grain, the honey glistening as it coated her tongue. The edges were crisp, adding contrast to the soft middle. It was, against all reason, delicious. Her throat tightened. She wanted to spit it out to keep her pride intact. But instead, she took another bite, then another, each one breaking down the fortress of certainty she had built. Wells watched quietly, arms folded, no triumph in her eyes, only patience. "Well, Mrs. Schneider?" Ilsa lowered her fork, unable to resist the truth. "It is good. Different but good." The words hung heavy in the warm air. Pride had cracked. The wall had fallen. Word spread quickly through the barracks. The proud baker from Berlin, the same woman who had declared cornbread unfit for humans, had not only tasted it but admitted aloud that it was good. By lunchtime, whispers had turned into arguments. Some German women scoffed, insisting she had been tricked. Others leaned in, eager to know what she had discovered. At the mess hall that evening, the golden squares no longer sat untouched. Frida led the way, slathering hers with butter and urging others to follow. Anna added honey, passing the jar down the table. One by one, women who had once mocked the bread began taking tentative bites. Their expressions betrayed the same surprise Ilsa had felt. First disbelief, then reluctant pleasure. Margaret, stubborn as ever, clung to her disdain. "It may taste tolerable with butter and honey," she sneered, "but it remains inferior. German rye is bread. This is dessert." Ilsa surprised herself with her reply. "No, Margaret. It is bread, just not ours. Different does not mean lesser." The words left her mouth before she realized she had spoken them. Around her, heads turned. The authority of her baker's training gave weight to the statement. Silence lingered, broken only by the scrape of forks. Greta shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps it is not so terrible," she admitted softly. For the first time, the dining hall did not echo with united mockery. Instead, it hummed with debate, curiosity, and cautious acceptance. The cornbread, once a symbol of defiance, had become a conversation. Ilsa ate her portion quietly, each bite both humbling and liberating. She realized she was no longer defending pride, she was defending truth. And in doing so, she had taken the first step toward a change larger than herself. 2 weeks later, the camp kitchen no longer belonged solely to Sergeant Wells. Side by side with her stood Ilsa Schneider, apron tied firmly around her waist, demonstrating the patience and precision required to craft German rye. Prisoners and staff crowded around, fascinated by her skill. "The secret," Ilsa explained in halting English, "is time. Rye dough cannot be rushed. It must breathe, rise slowly, develop flavor." Her hands worked with practiced grace, folding the heavy dough as though it were alive. When she stepped aside, Wells took her place, wielding a cast-iron skillet with pride. "And this," she said, pouring batter, "is how we do it in the South. Quick, hot, golden crust. The trick is respecting the cornmeal. Treat it rough and you'll get dust. Handle it right and it rewards you." The contrast was striking. German patience beside American speed, dark rye beside golden cornbread. Yet instead of clashing, the methods complemented one another. The kitchen, once a site of division, became a classroom of exchange. Prisoners who had mocked the yellow squares now leaned forward eagerly, asking questions. Some shared techniques for strudel or pretzels. Americans demonstrated biscuits and pies. What began as reluctant tolerance blossomed into genuine curiosity. Ilsa felt the change most keenly. Where once she had stood as judge and critic, she now found herself learning as much as teaching. Every loaf of rye pulled from the oven beside a pan of cornbread seemed to erase another invisible wall between the two groups. When the women carried trays of both breads into the mess hall, prisoners and guards alike sampled them together. Laughter replaced derision, and the room filled not only with the smell of baking but with the sound of shared discovery. Food, it seemed, was speaking a language both sides understood. Weeks passed, and the women at Camp Co grew visibly stronger. Their cheeks filled, their posture straightened, and the haunted hunger in their eyes began to fade. Meals that had once been mocked were now anticipated, and the cornbread, once ridiculed, often disappeared from trays before anything else. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived for Ilse through the Red Cross. It was from her sister, Katrine, still in Berlin. She opened it at her bunk, her hands trembling as she read. "We stand in line for hours. Yesterday's ration was 200 grams of black bread, stretched with sawdust. No butter, no meat, no vegetables. The children cry from hunger. People barter jewelry for scraps. Some starve in their homes." The word struck like a blow. Ilse looked around the camp, at the generous portions, at the steady meals that had restored her health. She was a prisoner, yet she ate better than her family at home. Shame rose in her throat, bitter and unrelenting. At dinner that night she pushed away her plate. The golden square of cornbread seemed to mock her. Wells noticed and quietly sat across from her. "Bad news?" she asked. "My sister is starving," Ilse whispered. While we eat like honored guests." Wells nodded, her expression soft but unflinching. "I can't change what's happening in Berlin. But you can honor your family by surviving. By learning. By carrying something home that can help them." Ilse's eyes fell again to the cornbread, warm and fragrant. It no longer seemed like pig food or even just bread. It was proof of abundance, of a culture that believed in feeding even its prisoners. In that moment she understood. Cornbread was not about flavor alone. It was about dignity. By the end of her first year in Camp Co, Ilse Schneider was no longer the proud baker who mocked American cornbread. She was a teacher, a student, and, most surprising of all, an advocate for the very bread she had once despised. The mess hall now served both German rye and Southern cornbread side by side, symbols of two traditions learning to coexist. Women who had once laughed now asked for seconds, some even experimenting with recipes of their own. For Ilse, each loaf represented something more profound than taste. It was proof that walls built from pride could crumble when met with patience and generosity. It was evidence that reconciliation could begin not with speeches or treaties but with something as humble as bread. When she wrote again to her sister, she no longer described captivity with shame. Instead, she told of a kitchen where former enemies baked together, where rye and corn shared the same oven. "One day," she wrote, "you will taste it too, and you will understand what I have learned here. That food can heal what war has broken." Years later, Ilse would look back and realize her journey began with that single stubborn refusal to taste cornbread, and the courage at last to take one bite. If this story moved you, subscribe now for more powerful tales where culture, food, and humanity collide. And let us know in the comments, what food once surprised you when you finally gave it a chance?